So this budget planning season was very challenging. I thank wholeheartedly the Finance Committee made up of, chaired by Mr. Krieger, our board president, Darcy Simarusti, is on the committee, so is Rob Magaziner. We worked closely over the last 2 to 3 months to put together a balanced budget for fiscal year 2019 that we're proposing. We have a couple of months until the final budget needs to be presented to the full board again, so we can make some tweaks here and there, but we don't anticipate significant changes. The process, as you can see on this slide, took, now 3 months, at least 3 months. Started in December when I had the building administrators and the supervisors, the athletic coordinator, our facilities director meet with Linda Hofela and myself over the course of about 2-3 weeks. We spent an hour to 2 hours with each individual, went over their budgets line by line, and had them give a rationale for the expenditures they're proposing. I'm very grateful to the administrators on my team as well for being so mindful of how challenging this budget year coming up is going to be. They came to me with either flat budgets or budgets with reduced costs in areas that I'll go over in a couple of minutes. Then in January and February, the leaders came back to their budgets and met with the Finance Committee at night over the course of 3 weeks. The next steps will have members of the Finance Committee and myself meet with the community. April 18th is the first date we've established to meet with the parents and guardians who have questions about the budget. We'll be doing that right here at Bartle. I appreciate the PTA's support helping me organize that. Even though it's an elementary PTO helping, this is a forum for the entire community. And key word there is forum. We are in the mindset that we need not only present the material to the community about the budget, but also hear back from the community. In that vein, the Finance Committee and I are going to, again, reach out to other sects of our community, including the Orthodox Jewish population. The last 2 years, we attended a forum at Congregation Ohav Emeth, but there's some talk about doing it a little differently this year. We may actually go into some homes of parents, residents who will host us. So that might make for an even more comfortable setting. And then I'll come back to the board, as well as the Finance Committee, April 23rd and finally May 7th, when we have to present the final version of the budget. Now, to give you a snapshot of the major changes that impacted our planning, you need to understand these 4 things. One, as in years past, our special ed expenditures increased dramatically, and I'm going to talk about details in a bit. We also saw a major uptick in the number of students who be declared homeless. I could count on one hand the number of homeless students we supported last year. I'm counting on 3 hands, double digits, somewhere in the 13 or 14 student range right now, students who we, in some cases, have to transport from where they domicile outside of Highland Park to Highland Park schools. The law that governs school responsibility to support homeless students, called the McKinney-Vento law, changed a little while ago. And the change was very impactful to school districts across the country. And that is, here in Highland Park, we are responsible for students who are domiciling outside of Highland Park, but who started schooling here for as long as they are homeless, whereas in the past, we were responsible for transporting those students up to 1 year. So we may be seeing, year after year, some increased costs, as long as we have families, guardians struggling to find permanent residence. Our transportation costs were something around $224,000 over what we planned to spend this year. Not just tied up in transporting homeless students, but in other areas as well, including getting our kids to athletic events, even field trips, and I'll explain why in a couple of minutes. We saw a double-digit increase in the rise of our health benefits costs, and even greater than last year, and that had a major impact on expenditures. And finally, while it's not a primary source of our challenge, it still contributed to the problem, and that is that we didn't get a significant amount of aid. Yes, we were one of the 94% of schools slated and then hadn't received additional aid, but the aid was not nearly enough to fully fund what Highland Park is supposed to receive. We're hoping the governor stands by his proposal to fully fund the formula in the next 4 years, but we fell way short of full funding. So as I've said in the past, if we look at the budget in a very simple manner, you can see it as really two things: how much you spend, expenditures, and how much you can pay for those expenditures, the revenue you bring in. It's about expenditures and revenue. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about both sides of the budget. First of all, our expenditures. As you can see, in the areas that we could control, that we actually had some real management influence over, like supplies, some programs, and the operation of the district, which might include costs for utilities, basic supplies for running the facility. We were able to par down, not drastically, but we do come in with this preliminary budget having cut our supplies and in some small ways our extracurricular programs. The district operations budget was able to be cut somewhat because of our creative way to pay for utilities more efficiently, and also to just scale back some of the things that we have been paying for that we can live without. Some landscaping supplies, for instance, a couple of maintenance projects that we were slated to do, like painting jobs in the interior or maybe refinishing a floor, they'll have to wait. We saw a little increase in our professional development, curriculum, and instruction budget. A lot of that has to do with the support we want to give our teachers at the K-5 level in the area of math. We're redesigning our math program. Our salaries ate up a very large portion of our expenditure pie. And I'm going to break down the salary costs in another 2 slides. Benefits, as you can see, are costing an additional $690,000 in change. And our special education costs, as I pointed out earlier, have increased. That number, $311,978, includes additional out-of-district tuition and some miscellaneous costs that we incurred when we had to open up new programs as a result of students who registered to the district who did not anticipate coming to our schools. Every year for the last several years, the cost to the district to pay for the out-of-district tuition and transportation of students whose needs we can't meet increases. I have to add, though, that that increase of $241,000 in tuition and the $22,615 in transportation also includes several unilateral placements of students who didn't even register for our schools initially. These are students whose families, guardians placed their children in other schools because they felt they were better fits for them, for their needs, but without having gone through the standard protocol that our district must maintain. Child study team evaluation if the child is considered for support services. So those are things that I really wish we could have had more control over, but the only thing we can do is work harder to combat those unilateral placements. Needless to say, it's going to drive, every time something like that happens, it's going to drive our out-of-district tuition costs up. And by the way, that increase of $241,000 and change and $22,000 and change for tuition and transportation respectively is above what we anticipated this year. We couldn't control the unilateral placements. We didn't anticipate those. And there are times when we do get students from outside Highland Park who require additional needs. We just can't can't always know the way our population is going to shift, much as we've done our research. There are times when we will just have unanticipated expenses. I mentioned earlier that I would break down the salary costs. Because of contractual obligations, that includes an increase to income we owe our staff, to some additional after-school activities we added after the contract with the Teachers Association was ratified. We've uptaken about $604,000. We also had to increase staff, bodies, people in our schools as a result of an influx of students, particularly at Irving School, and because of class sizes going too high, in which case we had to compensate teachers to work additional hours in their school day. So the additional compensation is included in this number of $576,250. Now, we are going to see a little bit of a savings because the leadership team, Ms. Hofela, the Finance Committee, and I worked very carefully to consider any non-essential staff and student population changes that may allow us to streamline some of our personnel. So when you add the salary increases, the staff increases, but you subtract the way we will be able to save in the area of personnel in some areas, it amounts to that number I showed you previously on this slide here I'll come back to. $826,933. So let's talk a little bit about revenue, how we're going to pay for our expenditures. As I pointed out earlier, we did not see a significant increase in our state aid. We received $97,136. Again, far short of the, I think it's roughly $400,000 we were supposed to receive if we were fully funded. We are anticipating at least 5 students from other countries coming to us, tuition paying at approximately $20,000 per student. That accounts for the $100,000 we are considering as revenue. We are going to use some of what we call our fund balance, $1 million in this case. Those are funds that we are going to work to save this budget year by not making some of the purchases that we had budgeted to make, so we can offset next year's tax levy. So we will take a little bite out of what we had intended to do this year from our budget, so we can save enough money to have $1 million in fund balance to offset next year's tax levy. Now that's $200,000 more dollars than we considered including in last year's, this current fiscal year's budget. This fiscal year, we used $800,000 of fund balance to offset the tax levy. We are also going to make less of a transfer to some of our reserve accounts, like our maintenance reserve, capital reserve accounts. That'll allow us to recoup about $23,000. We are anticipating additional, or what we call extraordinary aid, that the state provides school districts around July to make up for extraordinary circumstances regarding special ed student needs. This year we received a little over $300,000, so we're going to be conservative and bank on receiving another $300,000 going into next year's budget. And we are going to generate a little over $1 million by levying taxes here in Highland Park, and I'm going to explain that in just a second. The other revenue, which is insignificant, about $2,000, includes mostly facilities charges that we levy against those who rent our facilities. So this is a very important slide that I know a lot in our community have most interest in. I'm going to let everybody take it in, and then I'm going to do a deep dive and ask Ms. Hofela to expand a little bit on the increase for the average home. Just a second, Linda. So here are a few things I want to note. First of all, let me make sure everybody understands what we're showing here. So these are the different budget years going back to 14-15. You see our budget has increased by about $4 million, $4.7 million over time. You can also see the tax levy that the school district assessed year after year. This is the current year tax levy. This is proposed next year's tax levy. It's a 0.3% increase. I'll explain how we got to that number in my next slide. Now, the average increase for home, you see also fluctuated since 2014-15, 15-16, 16-17, and last year was 17-18. Now, I do recognize this number is a significant difference from this current year's fiscal budget. There are several factors that are influencing this number. One is the fact that we are proposing a tax levy of 4.03%. That's 0.3 more percent than last year. Last year, we recouped quite a bit of tax pot money from new developments, what we refer to as ratables. This year, we're not seeing as much of an impact from ratables, potentially because those units, housing units, new housing units that went online last year, well, the rate slowed down coming into this year. Slower rate of those units coming online and thus contributing to the tax pool. And the third factor, and I'd like Ms. Huffler to explain this in more detail, is the way in which the refinancing of our debt, the money we borrowed to pay for major projects, including the expansion of the middle school, the redesign of Irving Media's lab, and other things around the school district, did save us quite a bit of money last year, saved the taxpayer quite a bit of money. It's saving us money this year, but I would like Ms. Hopeful to explain why the big jump.
Okay, so the year we did the refinancing, we already had we were saving, we're going to save, I believe it was $50,000 a year, but it might have been more because I'm looking at the numbers. Anyway, because we already were in the year, the money that we saved in that year just got rolled into the following year. So the following year we had the savings that we're going to have on a yearly basis, but plus we also had the savings from the previous year. So it was like a double savings that we experienced in this, actually the 17-18 year. So what that means is that extra savings caused everyone's taxes to go down by more or go up by less, depending on your point of view. But the amount of that savings that got put into this year, obviously that was a one-time input or decrease. And so we're back up to the still savings compared to 2 years ago amount. But we don't see, so you see a spike whenever, if you see a dip in 1 year because you had that savings throwing in, you're going to see a spike to get back to the level amount. That's why we showed the 2-year average, because that savings spread out over 2 years shows that the amount was still less than it had been the year before.
Linda, could I add to that?
Yes.
The way I like to look at that is that if in 2017-18 we paid the 2.32% on debt service, that's kind of like making 3 payments towards debt service, whereas in 2018-19, because some of the debt service got put off into 2018-19, it's like not 4 payments, but quarterly, but 5 payments. That's why it's almost twice as much. It averages, as Linda just said, the average of the 71 where we only had 3 payments, 3 virtual payments, versus having 5 payments, the average is $161. I want to add one other thing, because I just finished my tax worksheets, and I shared this with the board a couple of weeks ago. My taxes on my house, which is the average house in Highland Park per taxes paid, I'm within a few cents of owning the average tax levy on a house. My taxes in 2016 were higher than in 2017. And you might say that's kind of hard to believe. How could it have gone down when the additional amount was $71? But again, our year isn't a calendar year. The town runs on a different quarterly system than we do. The county runs on a different system. It tends to be somewhat front-loaded and then somewhat back-loaded. When you add it all up, you can have years like that. This is not the first time. So it was actually, we actually had a smaller tax increase and a smaller tax levy in 2017 than we did in 2016. Certainly it's going to go up because the number is going up. But there was, call it a tax holiday last year. It went down.
To explain how we're able to go to 4.03%, everyone should understand that we are capped at 2%. We can't increase taxes over 2% unless we had money in the bank cap to utilize to go over that cap. We don't have any more allowance in bank cap to do so. However, the state does allow school districts to generate more revenue through taxes to offset the exorbitant increase in health insurance costs. So based on a calculation that the state provides and also based on the number of employees we serve and the costs to health care here in Highland Park, we're able to increase tax levy 2.03%. So if you put the two numbers together, that equals the 4.03% in this last column. Now, I'll place this presentation on the website tonight. Ms. Hoefele is going to also upload some user-friendly budget information that breaks down the budget in more detailed form. Remember, this is just a preliminary budget. There is room for changes if necessary. We'll get input from the community at the two forums we've planned. And if changes need to be made, the Finance Committee, Ms. Hoefele and I will meet again, and we'll reflect on this preliminary budget. Now, I just want to say a few last words before Mark and Darcy and Linda and I answer questions that anyone has. I pointed out earlier that my leadership team came to the table with either flat school-based or central office-based, by that I mean curriculum, instruction, PD-based budgets, or they were under budget last year. Mr. Benjamin, for instance, was under something like 4% from last year's numbers. They did a wonderful job helping me save where I could. After I accounted for all of those controllables, those go-to accounts that I could manipulate, supplies, curriculum, PD, I was still in the red $1.2 million if I was going to balance this budget as a result of those transportation costs, additional special ed costs, as a result of new students coming in, students we didn't anticipate would have to go out of district, salary costs, medical benefits. I was still in the red $1.2 million. It took me months and many sleepless nights, or mornings I should say, to finally come to a balanced budget with the help of Ms. Hoefele and the input from the Finance Committee. That being said, this budget will hurt a little bit. There are still things we could not manage next year. There's really little or no room for growth. Some places which we felt we had to fill gaps, particularly in the area of safety and security. But there are some cuts that are not going to drastically impact our kids. I don't think our kids are going to directly feel the impact of any of the cuts. But there are still some austerity budget measures that we had to put in place. So this was not an easy budget. I'm hoping next year's is a little better. I think what will help next year is if we don't have some of the additional costs that we didn't anticipate this year, next year. And if we also see increased state aid, it's definitely going to help. So with that, I'd like to open up for questions from the board, and the community will be able to ask questions when we go to public comment.
Scott, you mentioned safety and security. I think that's obviously an area that everyone is concerned about. It's an important area. It's a high priority. Could you talk about some of the areas that we are going to be spending money to improve safety and security?
Sure. I'm not going to get into too many details because I haven't spoken to people who may be impacted by these things, but for starters, we are going to incorporate more security cameras in our schools. There's a heavy price tag that's attached to that, but we feel it's a necessity. We are going to make some personnel changes, additions. We don't know what those look like yet, but we need to put some funds aside to make those changes as necessary. We are also looking to make some structural facilities-based changes to various schools. For instance, we want to replace the high school vestibule area with a glass interior enclosure so we can see through when we are welcoming people into the high school. We also would like to create a vestibule, a real vestibule here at Bartle, so that there is a middle hall between the outside entrance of Bartle when you first walk in and the actual school entrance, just like we have the middle school, the high school, and at Irving. So I think that captures it in a nutshell.
Thank you.
I have a question. So you talked about that we had all these unanticipated budget increases or need for more funds. So, and you said that we will hopefully have fewer of those next year, but how do we better anticipate those costs?
That's a great question.
Ouija board, maybe?
What?
There's a Ouija board, maybe? I mean, some of these are just, you can get one or two families move in that can cost the district hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, some of them, there's literally just no way to anticipate. You just can't. I mean, you just don't know who's going to be in your student body. And
I have a good example to illustrate what Darcy's talking about. So there's an arm of the state referred to as early intervention. Early intervention services identify children from infancy and a little older who who have special needs, may need extra support. Before they are school age, which is 3.5, they'll get some occupational therapy, physical therapy, whatever else they need. At 3.5, schools are responsible for many of these kids. Take them into a pre-K disabled program or send them to a program if they don't have one in the school. We have a pre-K disabled program, so we're responsible gladly to take these kids in. Early intervention is bound only to give us notice of children who might be coming to our doorsteps. Is only bound to give us 3 months notice. This past July, starting in July, and sporadically from July to about October, November, Ms. Freeboard, the principal of Irving, and now Ms. McNally, who's the interim principal, got word that numbers of students periodically from July on were going to be entering our program and would require services, which we didn't anticipate. I mean, not unless we do a door-to-door census check and ask if any of the children have special needs under the age of 3.5, but we really know. So that is, by the way, one unanticipated cost that took a big bite out of our budget. We had to hire an additional special ed teacher, 2 additional paraprofessionals. We spent some money actually creating an additional classroom space at Irving, supplies, it all added up. I suppose one thing we could do, and I have to thank Mark Krieger for being so on top of this, is take the demographers report that we received last year and do a really deep dive in that report. And Mark has actually been picking it apart and doing his own analysis. We have a folder in our shared drive. The board has a folder in the shared drive that has all this data. And the hope is that we could better anticipate some fluctuations.
The problem, though, is that we don't know what kind of needs the children will come in with. And in fact, that impacts us in 2 areas. It impacts us directly in our responsibilities towards educating children with special needs. It also impacts our salary budgets. You know, we can plan towards 50% of our budget, more or less, a little bit less, but 50% of our budget is salaries. And we can plan in negotiations for numbers that make sense. But then when you hire 11 more people because we have these pre-K placements, it really kind of breaks that budget. And I wanted to add, there's the third component, which is the medical. I mean, there's really three components that we have no control over, and that the state informed us in preparing the budget to expect a 14% increase. Now that 14% is on about $5 million in medical insurance we pay out of a $35 million budget. So it's 14% of the budget times a 14% increase. You can do the math. Right off the top, that's like a 3% increase in the budget. So that means you have to get money from elsewhere. You have to increase the taxes. And it's just, it's for this one issue. And again, we don't have much choice there. We have contractual obligations towards medical insurance. And it's the same as all the districts around the state who have the same state health benefits plan. And again, people should have good health insurance. We've made our commitment to that in negotiating. But when the state throws that number out at us, it really, really makes it hard in the budget.
I'll tell you one other thing we have been doing more diligently this year is making sure that we are not incurring costs that we shouldn't be on behalf of non-Highland Park residents. We had, some situations in which people were taking us to a place in which it would have cost us, in one situation, almost $100,000. But we did some research, investigative work, and we saved ourselves a little money in that respect because we're keeping our eyes open a little wider. There's just no room to allow for that kind of thing. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have another question, unless somebody else wanted to. So you also mentioned that, especially in the middle school and high school, because of the schedule, there have been teachers have had to teach additional periods, and there's been money set aside for that, and I don't know how significant that is, but I do know that the high school schedule, I think, is still sort of up in the air for next year, at least my last understanding, the last PTSO meeting I was at. And so do we have a good understanding of whether there'll be similar increases, consistent, whether it will go down based on a schedule?
That's another great question. So you're right, the schedule is not decided yet. What we're trying to do is improve upon what we put in place this year. We are going to be able to scale back the number of sixth periods compensation we provide teachers, but it's not so much a result of the potential schedule changes as it is just being even more creative than we were this past year, and assuming that we can actually make it work with what we have. Sixth period compensation is based on it's based on a teacher's salary. So if a teacher gets additional funds, we prorate the person's salary. It ranges from $10,000 to anywhere up to $18,000 per teacher. So this can add up. You have 10, 11, 12 teachers in middle and high school who are compensating for their additional work and time. You're talking $150,000, $160,000. So I'm sorry, I can't say that the ability for us to save money because we're not paying as many teachers for sixth period is a result of the schedule changes. But there are schedule changes in the works as well.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody over here have something? No?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we have control over, but I think that's the point of, what I understood with the healthcare costs. And I do feel like that's important. Obviously, everyone needs to have health insurance, but I do think that that's part of a broader conversation to keep in mind on, the national level is that I have family in other countries that don't have those expenses because they have health insurance covered by, so the health insurance provider is not taking like a middleman cut from the doctor, the hospital, etc. It's not something that we can control, but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
We did negotiate last year some changes, if you remember, to the health benefits for new employees, and that will over years that will save the district money.
It's a shame we have to do that.
It's a shame. No, I have to say, and I said this in negotiations, the Plan A or Plan B are both extremely good plans. They're New Jersey state health benefits plans. They're certainly as good as anybody has in any public or private enterprise.
Right.
But you have to make, you know, you have to do the best you can. But you're right, it's a bigger issue than our little district.
And this is still with teachers paying into their plans as well. So the amount the teachers are paying into their plans has increased exponentially as well. So everybody is feeling the pinch of these increases in healthcare costs. It's not just the district's budget, it's teachers' individual budgets as well.
We have teachers paying 1/3 of their medical increases, yet, you know, and administrators near the top of the scale, and that's huge amounts of money. It's just crazy.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of this perception that teachers have this free ride in terms of their healthcare, and
Not anymore.
Couldn't be further from the truth.
One area that we didn't see up in the presentation this time was which we had been seeing in the last several years past, was increase in cost for charter school students, which, while it is still a chunk, and it's a chunk that, you know, we all believe shouldn't be there at all, it's a slightly more manageable chunk this year, only due to a couple of fewer, Darcy, do you have the number? A couple of fewer students that are going out of district to charter schools.
Yeah, I don't have the exact number in my head. I think it's like 24 or 25 now at Hatikva. We don't have anyone at Greater Brunswick at this point.
It's still over.
So
it's still over
$300,000.
it's still a big chunk of money.
It's a
still,
chunk.
you know, still a nice $300,000 back in our budget would be awfully nice. But it's not increasing, at least not this year, which is something.
I know that there was discussion earlier in the year about transportation costs, especially because of the new housing developments. So is that, I know there was talk about additional busing and all that. Is that factored into the budget for next year? Is that something that isn't going to factor, you know, because they're not ready, they're not enough students? I don't know.
Yeah, that was factored into the budget based on our demographer's report.
Okay.
It's not a high cost item.
Okay.
It's costing us. The bus issue is also a result of the paucity of able CDL certified bus drivers.
Yes.
We have been spending a lot of money on coach buses, and we're not the only district. North Brunswick School District Superintendent told me recently that even though they don't have their own depot and their own purchased school buses, they don't have enough drivers to drive their own buses. It's a big issue, and it's something that my Superintendent's Association has discussed in Trenton. And it's a lot has to do with the certification requirements to become a bus driver. They're much more stringent. You have to learn some of the basic mechanics of a bus, and it costs a whole lot more money than it used to just to pay for the certification.
There's at least 3 increases in busing costs. One of them is the new apartments down on River Road. So that's a new bus route that's gotten started, and that's going to cost us. There's the athletics department's inability, as Scott says, to get regular school buses, so we've had to do anything to find busing for our teams. And then the third is both special education and homeless children that we bus. And that's very, very expensive and has added to the budget. These are all of these things we have to do, but it is an additional cost, and it's why the budget is tight.
We explored options. We never got to the finance committee level, but Ms. Hoefler and I talked about purchasing a bus internally and having a driver. But when you cost it out, it's actually as much, if not more expensive in some ways to maintain your own buses and drivers than it would be to outsource. So we're trying to be creative and fiscally prudent, but we're just getting harangued from all different directions. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
But we're managing, and I'll say this last word, whatever comes out of this will not be directly negatively impacted on the kids, and that's the bottom line. So with that, I'm going to close my report.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor.